to order. And as we are the opening committee, I am going to ask Legislator Ferretti to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Legislator Ford. Please join me. Place your right hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Legislator Ferretti. Okay, at this time, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, ma'am. Public Safety Committee roll call. Legislator Deborah Muley.
Here.
Legislator Sheila Bino.
Here.
Thank you. Ranking Member Delia DeRiggi Witten. Here. Legislator John Ferretti.
here.
Legislator Vincent Muscarella.
He's here.
Vice Chairman Stephen Rhodes. Chairwoman Denise Ford.
Here.
We have a quorum, ma'am.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Okay. There are 3 items on the agenda today, which are clerk items numbers 6-18, 11-18, and 12-18. Clerk item number 16, let the record show that Legislator Muscarella is here, and is an ordinance supplemental to the annual appropriation ordinance in connection with the District Attorney's Office. May I have a motion? Moved by Legislator Muscarella, seconded by Rhodes. Thank you. The item is before us. Who is here from the administration to speak about this item?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. How are you today?
Fine.
We have Mr. Bob McManus from the District Attorney's Office. I noticed we also have clerk item 1218 that he's here to speak on. Can we call that as well?
Okay, we'll call item 1218. Do I have a motion? Moved by Legislator Rhodes, seconded by? Second. Legislator Millay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Both items are before us now.
Good afternoon. Bob McManus, District Attorney's Office. Item 618 is an appropriation for the Aid to Prosecution grant that's received from New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. The Aid to Prosecution program utilizes grant funds to support the prosecution of repeat, violent, and serious felony offenders by maintaining a staff of highly experienced prosecutors who work to achieve convictions and maximum sentences for such defendants. The goal of the project is to expedite the processing of repeat and serious felony offenders in the following order of priority. Repeat offenders charged with a violent felony offenders, including but not limited to defendants charged with the following violent felonies: manslaughter, assault of a police officer, kidnapping, rape, arson, and possession of a firearm. And the third category is repeat offenders charged with a non-violent felony offense who have been previously incarcerated for those types of offenses.
We'll do. You want to read 12, and then any questions we'll have on both of them. Okay.
Oh, okay, fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Item 1218 is for the Motor Vehicle Theft and Insurance Fraud Prevention Program. This program, the funding from this program provides us with the ability to investigate and prosecute those who may commit Medicaid and auto insurance fraud, primarily focusing on undercover activity. The purpose is to identify individuals who file phony accident reports and insurance claims, in addition to healthcare providers who fraudulently bill Medicaid for accidents that are staged or that never occurred. Commission of this type of criminal activity very often involves organized groups of individuals due to the necessity of obtaining documentation from witnesses and medical professionals and paraprofessionals in order to facilitate the payment of fraudulently obtained funds.
Thank you. Is there any debate or discussion? Legislator Rhodes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Ford. Mr. McManus, thank you very much for the presentations. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Both are tremendously worthwhile programs. My question is actually a budgetary question. When we have appropriations supplemental to the annual appropriation, is that adding money to the district attorneys? And it's not just the DA's office. Obviously, this happens with all county departments as we receive grant funds. Are those grant funds already accounted for within the budget? In other words, does the appropriation of an additional $500,000 plus that we receive from a grant then free up $500,000 in money that's already been appropriated to the DA's office?
No, sir, it doesn't. It doesn't impact on our general fund budget. And the reason is because these grants come with the proviso that we are not permitted to supplant other activities that are budgeted through the general fund. So the answer to that is no.
So this would be additional enforcement activities consistent with the grant?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Legislator Bino?
Good day.
Hi.
So you mentioned that it would be escalating the prosecution process for violent offenders?
Yes, ma'am.
And did I also hear you say nonviolent offenders?
Nonviolent repeat offenders. In other words, chronic nonviolent offenders. Not someone who is, arrested for maybe 2 or 3 times. I guess you refer to them as career criminals.
Okay. And has the threshold been created at this point? To
Yes,
say
ma'am.
in terms of the number of
Yes.
nonviolent, and like what kind of nonviolent offenses? Are we talking about someone who's a repeat offender for petty larceny type of activity, or?
Well, the repeat offenders I'm referring to is the definition is in Penal Law Article 70. That doesn't say much, and I don't have a copy of that with me.
I was going to say, I know exactly what you're saying.
But I will be happy to provide that information to you.
I would be most interested to receive that. Thank you.
Okay.
Legislator Whitten?
Just getting back to what Legislator Rhodes said, these are reoccurring grants, correct? Like year to year, pretty much?
Yes, ma'am.
So you sort of budget them ahead of time, expecting to get them? Sort of?
Well, we plan on
Right.
yes, we plan on the aid to prosecution grant we've received for over 25 years.
Right.
The motor vehicle grant closer to 20.
Okay.
So yes, we do anticipate receiving these grants year after year.
And just to make it clear, this is a no matching grant, correct?
Oh no,
Okay.
no matching grant.
All right, thank you.
I have a question. We're going to jump you all around here. In regard to the ones with the fraudulent insurance claims, we
Yes.
get
Yes.
over $100,000. Do we keep a record, or do we know, like, through our prosecution and through the work that we do here in the county to help, combat this, do we have an estimate or an idea of how much money we actually save New York State insurance by investigating these crimes? If we spent $120,000 they give us to go after these type of cases, to cut down on them for fraudulent claims, do we know basically how much money we may save in the long run by doing this work?
The grant progress report, which is submitted on a quarterly basis, would include that information. So I will try to get
Okay, if you can, it's
some figures for you on
but we
that.
actually save them more basically than what we spend in prosecution.
Without question. And this program is conducted in conjunction with the insurance industry.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, anyone else? No? All right, any public comment or? Oh, it's Nita.
Good afternoon, Mita J. Meriday, Baldwin
Good afternoon.
resident. I, too, had some questions with regard to the funding. I'm always happy to hear the word grants, but it would be nice if those grants, as Legislator Rhodes asked, if this would somehow bring down the costs to the taxpayers. But additional services are as they are. So I am curious to know, again, and Legislator Ford, you kind of brought that up, if there are any types of numbers. What are the numbers of the incidents, and how effective have these programs been? We seem to continually be in a race to try to catch the criminal post-event, and we're not doing, I guess, a great job in terms of the prevention aspect, advising people up front of the issues and the, what can happen to them, the consequences of their actions. And we still have a number of residents who are sadly susceptible to a variety of scams that are very costly to them, particularly our seniors, veterans, et cetera. So I'm hopeful that we are able to move forward with a more proactive aspect in terms of providing the resources, the education, and the support for our underserved constituencies. As it pertains to 618, I wasn't quite sure if I heard all of the information, and all of you have all of us out here, for the most part, at a disadvantage, where this was geared towards bringing in highly experienced prosecutors into the district attorney's office. What do we currently have in the district attorney's office? I mean, unless I heard it incorrectly. And as it pertains to 1218, where we're talking about, again, the Medicaid fraud, again, how prevalent is this situation? And again, what are we doing proactively to address that so that these grants can be used towards, I mean, again, within the parameters of the grant, but they can be used towards education and prevention versus specifically prosecution?
Good question. Mr. McManus, can you just, it would be our understanding that this grant money that we get from New York State for both of these items are usually used toward actually investigations and going after these criminals. Is there an educational component to this as well, or is that additional or other funding?
In the motor vehicle theft and insurance fraud program, there was no educational funding, no.
Okay. You know, I know that you see commercials on TV where they're warning people against insurance fraud and everything. But, you know, this is something that, Ms. Merriday, we can ask on the state level, because all insurance basically goes to New York State, to see whether or not if there could be some sort of a aspect of education. Because I agree with you. A lot of times you see unsuspecting people who get caught up into insurance fraud, and they are not criminal at heart, but they get scammed because they don't know any better. And the next thing you know, they're in jail, and the people who drew them into it have the money, and they're at some island somewhere just having fun in the sun.
And somehow they're funded by something, but these programs are funded by tax dollars that don't seem to have. We just want an idea of the effective nature of these processes, as opposed to keep bringing people in. Unless we need to recreate a different wheel. We're just spinning, and we haven't left the building.
But I think if Mr. McManus can, if you could just give us a snapshot for 1 quarter, how much we actually save, if the insurance companies can let us see, so we could show the effectiveness of this program.
That would not be a problem.
And I just want to make it clear, too, that I know what you did ask about when you talked about bringing in experienced or good district attorneys as investigators. We already have them. You meant it that to give them the tools that they need to work with, because we do.
As a matter of fact, this program funds our most experienced and able attorneys who are experienced in prosecuting the type of crimes that I previously mentioned.
Right, and we're blessed with many of them, so already. All right, thank you very much. All right. All right. All those in favor of passing these items 6-18 and 12-18, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the item passes 7-0. All right, now we're going to call clerk item 11-18, which is an ordinance supplemental to the annual appropriation ordinance in connection with the police department. May I have a motion? Moved by Legislator Rhodes, seconded by Legislator Ferretti. All right. The item is before us. Who is here from the administration to speak about this?
We have Lieutenant Greg Stefanoff.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Lieutenant Greg Stefanoff from the Police Department. Item 11-18, this item appropriates $1 million in funds from revenues received from the United States Department of Treasury of federally forfeited property. This item is going to move that money into our budget so that it could be used. This money is used for further investigations. If we have to do anything over patrol, it's also used for if we have to put enhanced patrols out there for any kind of crime that's going on. So this will enable us to be able to utilize the funds.
And that would be able to, like, if you had to, like, add patrols, which may incur, like, overtime and stuff like that, this would help cover the cost of
Yeah,
it?
we use this, we don't supplement, you can't supplement the budget with this. We use this for anything extra in addition to what we have out there.
Is
Like,
this something like you would do DWI, or do we have a separate funding source for the DWI?
For DWI, it's a separate funding source.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any debate or discussion? Any questions? Oh, Legislator Whitten.
Thank you. So we're going to be using the 1 million that was collected now. That's what this says?
Yes, this is going to put it into our budget for us to use. Part of this is, we're closing out the books for 17 for the last quarter. Part of this is for that. The rest is going to be for 18.
That's what my question was. What is the total amount? Do you know that
What?
we
For what?
have? What's the total amount that we have in the fund?
In total, I don't know what's in total. You mean in all the lines?
Yeah, I was just curious
I
how
don't
much
know
we
in
bring
total.
in.
I'd have to look.
So you don't know how much we bring in yearly through this?
17, I don't know what we've brought in yet.
Okay. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just curious to see how much we bring in, so if you get an opportunity, just to
Sure.
let us know. Thank you.
Any public comment? I know, Ms. Jacobs.
Yes, Pearl Jacobs, Union Deal. Regarding item 1118, I support any initiative that supports our Nassau County Police Department. With the rising crime in our county attributed to gang activity and opioid drug use, we definitely need to support our Nassau County Police Department in every way that we possibly can. Improvements in our communities are also paramount to reduce crime. With the recent approval of the Uniondale Streetscaping Project, I would again like to thank Legislator Abrahams for his advocacy for his recent attendance at our Nostrum Garden Civic Association meeting in January. And it is the community's request that Legislator Abrahams and Councilwoman Gooseby engage in productive communication regarding this project so that work may begin swiftly, and that would hopefully, the broken glass theory would hopefully decrease crime in Uniondale. And again, please support our Nassau County Police Department.
Thank you very much for your comments. All right. There is, okay, pass it. I'm sorry. Okay. So there's no other business in front of this committee. May I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, I'm sorry. I know it. All right. All those in favor of passing? Thanks. I know I was 11-18. Please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. The item passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. There is no other business. Okay. Moved by Legislator Muscarella, seconded by Legislator Rhodes. Okay. This committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Economic, Community Development, Labor, and Transportation Committee. At this time, I'll call the committee to order. Yes. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, sir. Economic and Community Development, Labor, and Transportation Committee. Legislator Deborah Muley.
Here.
Legislator Ellen Birnbaum. Here. Thank you. Ranking Member Celia Bino. Here. Legislator Denise Ford. Here. Legislator Stephen Rhodes. Present. Vice Chairman John Ferretti.
Here.
Chairman Thomas McKevitt.
Here.
We have a quorum, sir.
Thank you. We have two items on the agenda. They are items 2-18 and 4-18. Item 2-18 is a resolution authorizing the county executive to execute a consulting services funding agreement between the County of Nassau, acting on behalf of the Department of Public Works, and the Long Island Railroad Company. May I have a motion, please? So moved by Mr. Rhodes.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ferretti. Anyone from the administration, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good,
Say
yeah.
It is a pleasure to be working with you at this level.
And Mr. May, by the way, in 12 years, I'm finally chairing a committee. This is a brand new experience for me.
Yeah, we actually have two items. There's also the IMA for the Long Beach N69. They're both public works. I have both people here. Do you want to call them up at once or do it separately?
I guess we can do them both at once. We have item number 4-18, resolution authorizing the county to execute an intermunicipal agreement with the city of Long Beach. We have a motion on that matter.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Ford.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pennell. Thank you. All right, so we have both items before us. Thank you.
Excellent.
Continue, Mr. May.
Thank you. We have Mr. Sean Sally to speak on the LIRR third track funding agreement.
Good afternoon, legislators. Sean Sally with the Nassau County Department of Public Works. This is a proposed funding agreement between the County of Nassau and the Long Island Railroad pertaining to the proposed third track project between Floral Park and Hicksville on the main line. The agreement covers a funding reimbursement essentially for the Department of Public Works for expenses relating to the design review and construction monitoring of infrastructure that is being either improved or additional infrastructure that needs to be constructed to support the proposed third track project. The county owns and maintains sewer infrastructure in the area, roadways, sanitary sewer, etc. There are substantial changes to county roadways, grade crossing eliminations along the project corridor that will require design review by the department as well as inspection once the construction commences. So this funding agreement, through negotiation between the County Department of Public Works and the Long Island Railroad, will reimburse county staff time as well as professional services that are procured by the county to assist in this operation. The Long Island Railroad has set forth an expedited time frame to complete the third track project. So in order for the county, for the Department of Public Works to allocate sufficient resources to meet that timeline, additional resources are required, and this funding agreement again will reimburse the county for those services.
And Mr. Sally, just to confirm, I mean, I can very much imagine that the cost for this can go well in excess of $500,000. So when that occurs, the railroad will then go and reimburse that additional amount as well, too, or we're going to need additional authorization. What's going to be the process for if it goes in excess of that $500,000?
Yes, so we were able to negotiate with the railroad for the $500,000, for the $500,000 temporary cap to basically get us started. We understand our services will be needed in the next couple of weeks. So to just get enough money to get us moving, and then we fully expect to request additional funds from the railroad, and they have expressed that they will be entertaining those additional requests. The agreement is set up so that the county executive can enter into a funding agreement with the Long Island Railroad to increase that funding cap. Now, as the project becomes, or the scope becomes more defined, this is a design-build project undertaken by the railroad. As the actual project scope becomes more defined, that budget that will also become clearer, and we will seek to refine that agreement so it reflects the actual work that we need to do, as well as the cost that it's going to take us to do that work over the 4-year project lifespan.
Is there any other debate or discussion on this matter? Yes, Ms. Birnbaum.
When does the county intend to issue an RFP for the design review and with construction monitoring?
Sure. So the construction review request for proposals is on the street now, and proposals are due at the end of the week, at the end of this week. So we expect to review and turn around a draft contract as soon as possible, again, to adhere to the Long Island Railroad timeframe.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sally, how are you?
All right, how are you? Happy New Year.
Doing well, thank you. Question. Do we have the capacity to be able to handle this in-house? In other words, for the design build, can we do that ourselves, or do we have to go out for an RFP?
in order to give the time and the resources necessary to this project, the scope, just to kind of cover it briefly, but the grade crossing eliminations, 4 of those roads are county roads, Covert, New Hyde Park Road, Willis Avenue, and then Main Street, which is actually a road closure. But there's substantial work planned in those areas, as well as other areas along the corridor. So it really does take an extension of the department to be able to conduct those reviews in the very fast pace that they'll need to be done in order to maintain the Long Island Railroad timeframe.
Thank you. Has there been any discussion with the administration to try and reach a more comprehensive agreement? Because my concern, obviously, this work is only necessary because the Long Island Railroad and the state have announced their intention to construct the third line. I'm just concerned, since we have the first $500,000 cap, we know that the work is going to exceed the $500,000, especially if we're now going to go and pay an outside vendor to actually perform that work. Shouldn't we receive some sort of assurance from the state first that they're going to pay whatever those expenses are before we get into the middle of something and perhaps have the rug pulled out from under us?
Right, absolutely, and I completely agree with your concern. While we don't have the sort of the agreement in writing to fall back on, we have had extensive conversations with the railroad over the past year, essentially, to get to a comfort level where that additional funding will be committed. Towards the end of 2017, what we expected the project to actually begin in late 2017. We felt that we needed to expedite an agreement quickly because we were going to run out of time and basically be left with a project that was moving forward without the adequate level of resources and sort of immediately putting us behind the 8 ball. So we tried to address that and agreed on this limited amount of funding for the first phase. But we do need to discuss with the railroad sort of a more clear path to the additional funding. We know that many of the villages that are along the main line and that are affected by the project are part of a larger agreement for a larger pot of money for any impacts to those, to mitigate any impacts to those communities. We understand that the county would be subject to a separate, essentially, source of funding to accommodate our resource needs or design review resource needs. So we can commit at this point to go back to the railroad before we come back to the legislature with a contract for the design services to ensure that we have some more specificity and clarity on the additional funding.
Is there any possibility of having an actual written agreement? Old lawyer talk, right? If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, right? I'm just concerned that we're going to get ourselves into something that we don't have the money to get out of.
And I agree, and I think that, again, before we come back to this legislature with a contract for professional services, that we.
I appreciate it, Mr. Sally. Mr. Arnold?
Legislator Ken Arnold, Public Works. It's in the best interest of the railroad to support our endeavor. Without their support, the project will be delayed because of our resource allocations. So it is in their best interest, and we have full faith that they will come to the table with what we need to support their project on their time frame. And we work towards that, like Mr. Sally said, before we have the consultant agreement here to get that more specific, put in writing for you.
That absolutely makes sense, Mr. Arnold. Let's just try and tighten that up. Thanks.
Mr. Ferretti.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Sally, nice to finally meet you after many years working with you over the phone on many subdivision issues in the county clerk's office. Can you tell us what percentage you anticipate of this initial phase can be completed in-house?
The majority of the work we would expect to be performed by the consultants that we procure. Of course, and we expect those to be design professionals, and civil engineers, et cetera. They will need to be managed by in-house staff, and a lot of the all the institutional knowledge and knowing where a lot of the necessary documentation is the county staff has that information. But I would say the majority share of the design review would be performed by the consultant services.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any further? Yes, Ms. Bennell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we issue the RFP, you mentioned earlier that the villages are going to be impacted, and I believe one of the towns will be as well. Have we considered shared services in terms of utilizing consultants that could provide the service across all the different municipalities?
Legislature, I think that's an excellent idea, and we should pursue that. The way the RFP was written, we were specific, again, to get a cost proposal that we could review apples to apples, but the scope was specific to county infrastructure and county roads. We do understand that there are town roads and village roads that will be impacted, and some village infrastructure, sewer and related. So that's something that we can discuss in the department to see if that's a potential. I'm sure the railroad would appreciate that too.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Any further discussion? Any public comment?
Rita J. Merriday, Baldwin resident. I have a number of questions and concerns, and I do appreciate the diligent questions that are being asked by our legislators, particularly Legislator Bino and Legislator Birnbaum with regard to the RFP. As many of you know, my focus largely is on including veterans and service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses, and we're looking at funding that comes from dual processes and largely from taxpayers. So my concern has to be with the statement that the proposals are already on the street. I'm curious as to what street the proposals actually hit, what changes have been put in place with the procurement and the outreach, because as most of you know, maybe the newbies need to get that refresher, that update with regard to how procurement has taken place in the past. So those of us who are out here kind of working in these trenches and not seeing too much change and having to travel on both town, county, and village roads that are deplorable, to say the least, we're curious as to where is the diversity, where is the inclusion, where is the outreach. And the mitigating circumstances, as many residents find out, they don't really find out until that road has been closed, till that access has been denied. And not everyone in Nassau County has a car, and many of them have to travel by bus. So when you're also talking about this mitigation and the funding, where does that funding go? Who administers that? And again, in the basic levels, how are residents' interests being protected? So those are just some issues that I have that pertain to that. But largely, again, the vetting process has nothing changed. I know on paper it looks good that the outgoing majority group, which is still in the majority, but the previous group passed a lot of things like Christmas presents, including an inspector general, but without having it funded, staffed, and actually operational. We are concerned that much of the same will be in place, even though I'm trying to be very positive and optimistic as I continue to watch our veterans who are leaving in droves, and those who are trying to remain here are not getting any support services. And again, on paper, according to the U.S. Census, there are over 11,000 veteran-owned businesses in Nassau County. We have no directory. We have no support service. We have no outreach system. Questions, 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 but more importantly, concerns. You all are responsible. You are the stewards of our funding and our resources. Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Or if not, we'll move it for a vote. All those in favor, please by saying aye.
Aye.
All those in favor? All those against? Motion passes. Now we'll go on to item number 4-18, which is the intermunicipal agreement between the Nassau County and the City of Long Beach regarding busing service. Anyone on behalf of the administration? Mr. Arnold.
Good afternoon, Ken Arnold, Public Works. Item 4-18 is a funding agreement between Long Beach and the county for the bus service that the city provides within the Barrier Island. This is a retroactive contract to catch up on past payments. The issues with the past payments was that the city did not reach out to us on an expired contract, and then it took quite a bit of time to get all the disclosures and all that paperwork in order to get this to the finish line.
Any questions or discussion? Ms. Bino.
Good afternoon, Mr. Arnold. So you state here that the city didn't reach out to us. We don't have these things or these contracts, especially those that are tied to revenue, in a tickler, let's say, or something that would address, would bubble up and let us know that it was expiring?
We did reach out to them at one point. They never got back to us. Our people did not follow up, and then it was an expired contract. We are changing our protocols to get better at following up on contracts before they expire. But in this case, one of our planners did reach out to the city, had no response. The city people changed, and then when we reached out a second time, the contracts were already expired.
Did they pay annually?
Actually, we have to pay them in this case.
Oh, we're paying them, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
That's
sorry.
why it caught us
It's
off
their
guard, too.
revenue. All
Yeah,
right.
we owe them money.
Oh, forget it. No, I'm
Okay.
kidding. No, but
I understand your concern.
Yeah.
We're trying to get more focused on that, but the department runs hundreds of contracts, so sometimes these things get slipped past us.
okay. I suspect IT, and I think we have a new IT commissioner or something. Maybe they could create a program. Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions? Ms. Ford.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Legislator Bino, because we do have to watch out for the money. But as a resident of the city of Long Beach, I'm a little dismayed that the city would allow 2 or 3 years to go by without filling out the paperwork and the vouchers so they can get reimbursed for the money that they pay for this bus system. That's very critical to the residents. What steps are we going to take to try to get them so that they move a little bit faster? Because this is taxpayer money.
Well, during this process, I think they understand now what the county's requirements are to get the contracts through. It was a big learning curve. I mean, we started this probably 9 months ago to get this straightened out. It took almost all of 17 to get to this point.
But how many years have we been reimbursing them for the N69?
Oh, it predates my involvement in public works.
Okay, so there is no learning curve.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
But
You're being very kind.
the current people that are in charge of this area now understand what we need to do.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Ferretti.
Mr. Arnold, thank you. You mentioned in your response to Legislator Bino that there was a change in staff over in the city. Is that the case, or what are you referring to?
Yeah, there was when we first brought this up to the city, then they had a change in staff, and I think it got lost over there at that point. And then by that time, the contract had expired. The next time we went and followed up with them, and then we had to work with new people to get to where we are today.
When did you first bring it to their attention?
I'd have to go back to my notes, but it was probably early in 17.
And you brought it up a second time, an additional time, you said?
I don't know. I assume my people did, but I have to go back and talk to them.
Okay, thank you.
Any further? Ms. Birnbaum.
Is this the usual that we have 1-year contract, 2-year? What is the agreement, the IMA, with the city of Long Beach?
This current IMA expired at the end of 17. I'm going to go back to my transit folks and talk about setting up a longer-term contract so we don't have to keep doing amendments. There'll be discussion in this year as we work towards 18.
What is the typical length of time for an IMA such as this?
IMAs of all different types. This type of IMA should be a multi-year IMA because it's a reoccurring obligation in both directions. So some IMAs would not be, but this one I would work that this should be something within 3 to 5 years so we don't have to keep revisiting it. And we would be encumbering money each time this has to be modified.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Muley.
Yeah, are there any financial ramifications for the fact that the payment is going to be late?
We already did work with the Comptroller's Office setting up accruals for this, so our books are set up for these late payments. I'm not sure on the city's part if they have any issues, but on our part, our financial people have worked with the controls office to show this properly on a year-end accruals that this is being taken care of.
Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arnold, just out of curiosity, for how many years has the city of Long Beach been providing these services to Nassau County?
At least over 8 that I've been involved with the bus system. They run their own bus on the Barrier Island. They don't use the nice bus system. I think they want more control of it. And the county back many years ago decided to reimburse them for that service.
Okay. That's close to...
I know ever since I've been involved. It has to be at least 14 because I know that. Yeah.
I know at least 8 since I've been coming.
But I think it's probably like over 20.
Yeah, would you mind, just for the full, obviously this is going to pass on to the full edge. Would you mind just doing a little research on that point?
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Any further discussion? Any public comment? Or if not, we'll move it. All in favor, please, by saying aye.
Aye.
All the opposed, nay. Motion passes, and this committee is now adjourned. Please, a vote to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning? Mr. Moved by Mr. Rhodes, second by Mr. Ferretti, second by Ms. Birnbaum. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Committee is now adjourned.
There we go. Public Works and Parks Committee is hereby called to order. I am here, Vice Chairman Bill Gaylor, Laura Schaefer, James Kennedy, Ranking Member Bino, Mr. Drucker, and Mr. Lafazan. We have a quorum. We have one item today. It's item 2 of 2018, a resolution authorizing the county executive to execute a consulting services funding agreement between the County of Nassau, acting on behalf of the Department of Public Works, and the Long Island Railroad Company. Motion, please. Motion by Ms. Schaefer, seconded by Mr. Lafazan. Okay, who do we have from the administration?
Good afternoon. We have Mr. Sean Sally from Public Works to speak on this item. Mr. Chairman, can we ask that the testimony from the Economic Development Committee be incorporated by reference?
Certainly.
Sean Sally, Nassau County Department of Public Works. The item before you today is an agreement, a funding agreement between the County of Nassau and the Long Island Railroad to provide funding reimbursement for services undertaken by the County Department of Public Works in relation to the Long Island Railroad third track project, a proposal on the Long Island Railroad main line between Floral Park and Hicksville. The County Department of Public Works will be required to review the substantial infrastructure improvement design that is part of the third track project, particularly grade crossing eliminations that deal with county right-of-way, county-owned infrastructure along the corridor, as well as construction monitoring as the project proceeds into construction. So this agreement will provide reimbursement for department staff working on the project, as well as consultant services that the county is desirous of procuring to assist the department in conducting the design review and the construction monitoring in a manner that conforms with the expedited Long Island Railroad timeframe for this project.
Right. I have a question. What if the county expends more money than what the funding source is requested here?
So the $500,000 that is part of this agreement today is meant to really get us going. We negotiated this back in 2017, thinking that the project would actually start towards the end of 2017. So we wanted to make sure that we had assurances from the Long Island Railroad that we could begin design review as soon as the Long Island Railroad contract was approved and a notice to proceed was issued. However, the agreement fully contemplates additional funding being committed by the Long Island Railroad, and so the funding amount, the not to exceed, will be, there's a option essentially to increase that amount. We do need to speak to the railroad as to the time frame for that additional funding, as well as the ultimate amount that will be available. However, we're not committed to review or expend any resources above and beyond the funding cap in the agreement. However, it's in our best interest to review the design of the project as well as inspect the construction for the entire project, as much of the infrastructure, as mentioned, is county-owned, will continue to be county-owned in perpetuity.
So what you're saying is that basically it's the intention that the county be made whole with respect to whatever we spend investigating this project.
That is correct.
Do we have any questions? Mr. Drucker, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Do you have any idea when does the county anticipate issuing the RFPs?
So the RFP was issued in the last weeks of 2017. Responses are due at the end of the week. So we will be reviewing proposals next week.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Ms. Schaefer.
Hi, Mr. Sally. How much of the project is the county involved in? Is it just relative to, I mean, how is that determined, basically?
Sure. So while the project is essentially adding an additional track and station improvements, et cetera, one of the major components is also the grade crossing elimination. And so 4 of those roads are county-owned: Covert, New Hyde Park Road, Main Street, and Willis Avenue. So that is a substantial design and construction project, not only for the right-of-way itself and the traffic design, but also sanitary sewer and stormwater infrastructure that's currently in that location but needs to be, again, substantially improved. So those are, even just one of those intersections would be considered a large project. So essentially 4 in a short amount of time will require a considerable amount of resources from the department.
Okay. And do you have any idea or any sense of whether or not $500,000 is going to cover what we need, or how much more we potentially could go over? My concern, obviously, is that we will go over and we're not going to get reimbursed.
So we expect absolutely to require more than the $500,000. We expect that initial amount to cover us for about 4 to 6 months of design review. We expect the first few months to be very intensive in terms of the plan reviews portion and plans coming to the county from the railroad. So to get us really up to speed and moving, we think we'll have enough money to get to complete those tasks. But we will need more.
Okay. And how long does the design review process go?
The Long Island Railroad has approved a design-build contract, so the design will essentially progress throughout the entire length of the project.
Okay, so it's going to be a continual, probably we're going to be coming back and forth doing this repeatedly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, no more questions.
If I might, Mr. Sally, just to, and this would include not only whatever RFP we put out, but also the in-house work that's done, the salaries that are attributable to those who are reviewing the project in-house.
Yes, so in-house staff is eligible for the reimbursement.
Okay. Any other questions from the legislature? Any public comment? Ms. Meriday.
Rita J. Meriday Baldwin. Yes, I'm hoping that this time I can hopefully get an answer to some of the questions. Wow, it's a fast 3 minutes. Again, speaking to the issue about the RFP being distributed at the end of 2017, my question again, and I'm hoping I get more than crickets this time, is where was it distributed? What new innovations, directions, constituency groups, communities, organizations are on the list that have received this? And if there is a deadline, I believe I heard the end of this week, who determines if that pile, that grouping, that listing will be reflective and representative of the companies and the communities that live on Long Island? And again, I'm fully aware of the fact that this is just a start. So $500,000 for this multi-billion-dollar project truly is, unfortunately, a lot of money, but it's a drop in the bucket. And we have to understand that this is not something that will have a time frame on it just because of the conditions in which this process has to take place. Again, being a 9/11 first responder and being involved with a lot of the downtown rebuild, I understand that dynamic. But what I do not understand, again, is that we are continuing to operate based upon guidelines and procedures set by folks outside of this region, because you still have a lot of people who are going to be disadvantaged, and how is that going to be communicated to them, and what resources, what plans are in place, not just to reimburse our staff and find out how the staff is going to get their money back. I mean, how the county is going to get their money back, because staff and the consultants are going to get paid, even though we don't have an inspector general or a proactive plan in place to address how these consultants will be determined. But what about the impact on the residents? I'm not hearing anyone speaking to the issues as it pertains to that mitigating fund base that's going to communicate the significance of this project to our residents. And as I said, lastly, what are we doing with regard to outreach to groom, develop, and incorporate service-disabled, veteran-owned, minority, and women-owned businesses into this project and provide work for the residents who are struggling to live here on Long Island? So I'm not here waxing poetic because I want to hear myself talk. And I brought up that pinwheel before because I guess I need to prove a point that the air I breathe as a 9/11 first responder is precious to me. So I am hoping that we are going into 2018 with more aggressive, inclusive, and across-the-board programs and services that are benefiting the taxpayers who do not still feel like they have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Bino.
Ms. Meriday, in terms of the communication to the local residents, this is a Long Island Railroad initiative, and they have been the ones spearheading communications to the actual community. Just recently, they had to close the road in Westbury, and they sent me a notice, they sent the village a notice, and we both then sent information to our constituents. But at the end of the day, in terms of impacts to community for the third rail, it's borne to the state by way of this initiative.
Any other public comment? Hearing none, all those in favor of moving this item, please say aye. Any opposed? The item passes unanimously. There's no further business. Motion to adjourn by Mr. Gaylor, seconded by Ms. Schaefer. All those in favor, please say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you. Next up is Finance. We need a few people. We need
Okay, Finance Committee. I'll call the roll. Mr. Muscarella, Mr. McKevitt, Ms. Walker, Ms. Birnbaum, Mr. Drucker, and Ms. Muley.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. All right, item 1 of 18, resolution 1 of 218, which is authorize the transfer of appropriations within the budget year, the year 2018.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I've been advised I need to put my name on the record. Greg May.
Mr. Muscarella, seconded by Legislator Birnbaum.
All set?
Mr. May.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Thank you, sir. How are you? We're
So
going to
far.
have Ms. Martha Worsham from OMB answer questions on this item. She's also going to be answering questions on 5 of 18 and 9 of 18.
Do you want to call them together?
All together? Is that all right?
Okay, sure. So number 5 of 18 is another transfer of appropriations, as is 9 of 18. No, yeah, they're all during the year of 17. Right. Good. So motion. Okay, and Legislator Birnbaum second will include those items. All in favor? Okay, it's all before us. All right. Anyway, before us. Please.
Martha Worsham, Budget Office. Item 118 is a board transfer to cover the shortfall of fringe benefits and salaries in the PDH fund. Item 518 is a board transfer to cover salaries and fringe shortfalls within the sewer fund. And item 918 is a board transfer to cover salary shortfalls in the Department of Veteran Services.
All right, and the money's all there, just from other budget lines.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The money's there, it's just transferred
Yes,
from other
yes,
budget lines.
it's coming from lines from within each one.
Any questions from legislators? Any public comment? All those in favor?
All right.
Any opposed? Okay, the items pass. Number 2 of 18 is a resolution authorizing the county executive to execute a consulting services funding agreement with the Long Island Railroad Company. Motion by Legislator Walker, seconded by Legislator McKevitt. Who do we have for this?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. This is 218?
Yes.
Okay. We have Mr. Sean Sally from the Department of Public Works. I'll just request that the testimony from the previous committees be incorporated by reference.
Okay.
Sean Sally, Nassau County Department of Public Works. The item before you is a funding agreement between the Nassau County and the Long Island Railroad to cover reimbursement for staff time and consultant resources in relation to the Long Island Railroad third track project, a project that is proposed on the LIRR main line between Hicksville and Floral Park. that involves considerable infrastructure improvement to county-owned and operated infrastructure. And so this agreement would essentially provide funding reimbursement for in-house and procured
Reimbursement to us, to the county, or from the county? To the county.
To the county, yes, yes. To reimburse for staff time as well as consultant support that will be working on design review and construction monitoring of the third track project.
Any questions from legislators? Any public comment? All those in favor? Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Sally. Number 6 of 18 is an ordinance supplemental to the annual appropriations contract in connection with the District Attorney's Office. Motion by Mr. McKevitt, seconded by Ms. Muley.
Bob McManus, District Attorney's Office. This item is this supplemental appropriation is for the Aid to Prosecution, a grant program which utilizes state grant funds to support the prosecution excuse me, of repeat, violent, and serious felony offenders by maintaining a staff of highly experienced prosecutors who work to achieve convictions and maximum sentences for such defendants. This is the 25th year that we are receiving this funding from the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services.
Questions from legislators? Public comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimously passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 7 of 18 is another transfer of appropriations. Moved by Legislator Walker, seconded by Legislator McKevitt.
Good afternoon, Mary Ellen Lorraine, Department of Health. These are two line item transfers, both New York State Department of Health grant funded, and it allows us to maximize grant reimbursement and no impact to the budget.
Questions from legislators? Public comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. 10 is another transfer of appropriations. Motion by Mr. McKevitt, seconded by Ms. Walker.
I'm sorry, this is clerk item 10. Clerk item 10, we have Lieutenant Greg Stefanoff from the Police Department.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Greg Stefanoff from the Police Department.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant.
Item 10, this is a transfer that appropriates $2.3 million in funding to cover salaries in police headquarters. The money is coming from our OTPS lines other than personal services, and we're moving it into the salary line. This is due to an unanticipated increase in retirements that we had in 2017. So we have to cover the people, the termination pays as they leave.
Good. Questions from legislators? Any public comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you,
Lieutenant. Number 11 is another appropriations, a transfer of appropriations, it's supplemental to the annual appropriations of the Police Department. Moved by Legislator Walker, seconded by Legislator Mascarella.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Greg Stefanoff again. This item appropriates $1 million in funds and revenues received from the United States Department of Treasury, federally forfeited property. This is going to move the money that's received into our salary line so that it could be used by the police department. This is typically used in further investigations and also for this can't federal forfeiture money cannot supplement the budget. It's used for anything extra, anything in addition to normal operations.
So is there a shortfall in normal salary line?
No. This is a separate. This is our asset forfeiture money.
Yeah.
This is a separate funding source for the police department.
Okay. Thank you. Questions from legislators? Public comment? All those in favor? Oops, excuse me. Ms. Maraday.
Yes, Mita J. Maraday, Baldwin resident. The Office of the Lieutenant made an interesting comment, so I just wanted to ask a quick question as it pertains to what other areas that any of these additional funds outside of salaries could be used, because I know that the acting commissioner is very involved in programs like the Explore program and things like that with the project that would be taking place at Hempstead Lake State Park. But also there is a health concern that I'm hoping to work with the police department and other first responders in educating a number of county residents with regard to seeking screenings as it pertains to 9/11 exposures, because there are thousands of residents who volunteered down at 9/11, and unfortunately many of them never sought screening early in these last 2 years.
Do you have anything on this item?
That's why I'm asking. That's why I'm putting it out there. If there are other areas that these additional funds can be utilized, if that's an area.
Why don't we just get the answer? Lieutenant Stephanov.
Oh, I'd love to get an answer.
The question is what, if the additional screenings for police officers?
Yes.
Can this money be used for that?
I'd have to check. We're under federal guidelines on how the money's used. So whenever we go to use the money, we make sure it fits the federal guidelines.
Can you have the answer for us next week?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have
Thank
number...
you.
Sure. Number 12. Oh, sorry. We have vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the item is unanimous. Number 12 is an ordinance supplemental, the annual appropriations, connection with the district attorney's office. Moved by legislator Drucker. Yeah. Seconded by legislator Walker.
Thank you. This item is to appropriate funds from the Motor Vehicle Theft and Insurance Fraud Prevention Program. This funding enables the District Attorney's Office to investigate and prosecute those individuals who may commit Medicaid and auto insurance fraud, primarily focusing on undercover activity. The object is to identify individuals who file phony theft or accident reports and insurance claims, in addition to health care providers who fraudulently bill Medicaid for treatments, for unnecessary treatment for individuals that claim to have been injured in phony accidents.
Interesting. Questions from legislators? Public comment? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, the item passes unanimously. I'm going to jump over to the addendum, and we'll come back for the final item on the regular calendars. Number 41 of 18. Motion to suspend the rules. Okay, motion by legislator Muscarella, seconded by legislator Drucker. All those in favor of suspending the rules? Aye. Any opposed? The rules, I'm sorry? Did I hear a nay? Okay. The rules are suspended. So now we're coming to the item, which is 41 of 18. It's an ordinance supplemental. Did we do that already? To the annual appropriations in connection with police headquarters and a transfer of appropriations. Motion by legislator McKevitt, seconded by legislator Walker.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Greg Stephanov.
Lieutenant Stephanov, hi.
Item 41 of 18. This item appropriates $14 million in funds from the general fund to the interfund account in the police headquarters. This is similar to the previous item. This and the previous item will cover our shortfall from unexpected terminations, especially in December of 2017, and we'll cover the salaries so that we can pay the members.
And good, we don't have to borrow for this.
No.
That's great. Questions from legislators? Any public comment? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The item passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lieutenant. Now we're going to come back to the last item on the regular calendar, which is number 13 of 18. Before I do that, well, actually, I'm going to call the item. I'll call the item, and after that, what we're going to do is have a combined meeting with the Rules Committee just for the one item so that we don't have, we'll convene the Rules Committee. They'll do this item, then we'll adjourn the Finance Committee. So let me just call the item, since that way we don't have to do it all twice. So number 13 of 18 is an ordinance providing for capital expenditure to finance the payment of judgment and authorizing $45 million of bonds to finance it and making certain determinations pursuant to the finance law. It's a motion by Legislator Walker, seconded by Legislator Birnbaum. Okay, the item is before us. We're going to convene the Rules Committee, and then we'll deal with the item. So let me just make a very short statement before that. There was an interview with me by Newsday about this item last week. Newsday managed to have 3 different versions of the exact same quote within 12 hours. The last one of which had those infamous several dots, which kind of robs things of context and clarity. So I just want to make clear what my opinion has always been, which is that, generally speaking, we don't want to be borrowing for something for which we should be reserving in advance. Now, obviously, in the early years of my tenure, we did authorize certain things because you can change things at once, but in recent years, we haven't done so. I'm in favor, generally, of continuing to make prudent reservation for items such as this. That having been said, of course, I understand that there are, at times, exceptional circumstances, and hopefully we'll find out about that here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coppell. I'd like to call the Rules Committee to order and ask Mr. Pulitzer to read the roll.
Thank you. Rules Committee. Legislator Sela Bino. Legislator Delia DeRigi-Witten. Ranking Member Kavan Abrahams. Legislator Laura Schaefer. Legislator Stephen Rhodes. Vice Chairman Howard Coppell. Chairman Richard Nicolello.
Here.
We have a quorum, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to call the same item that's currently before the Finance Committee, 13 of 2018. It's an ordinance providing for a capital expenditure to finance the payment of certain judgments or compromised or settled claims against the county, authorizing $45 million of bonds of the County of Nassau to finance said expenditure and making certain determinations pursuant to SECRA and the local finance law. Moved by Legislator Schaefer, seconded by Legislator Coppell. The items before the committee. And Mr. May.
Thank you. We have Mr. Beaumont Jefferson, County Treasurer, and Mr. Connell Denyon from the County Attorney's Office to answer any questions you may have on this item.
Thank you.
Thank you. This bond ordinance funds the payment of the final judgment in the matter of Restivo et al. Versus the county, including attorney's fees and costs and bond cost of issuance. As noted, $45 million is the maximum for the bond that is expected to be right at about that level. This is a 2014 jury verdict in favor of the 2 plaintiffs of $36 million with the attorney's fees and cost of issuance and bond cost of issuance. It brings us up to the $45 million. As many of you know, the money, the cash has been placed in an account pursuant to a stipulated order by the federal court judge. The $45 million pursuant to that stipulation must be paid within 30 days of the denial of cert at the U.S. Supreme Court, which occurred on January 8th, which brings us to February 7th. It has to and will be paid by that date.
So the obvious question is, why would we bond this if there is money sitting in a reserve fund for this purpose?
Well, I think you have to separate the cash, which we would have to pay anyway. Judgments have to be paid, notwithstanding a budgetary authorization. So the cash has been set aside. It's federal court. We don't get an automatic stay, unlike state court. So the judge had required the money to be put into the special bank account that the treasurer is controlling. And what you still need to think about and still plan for is, how does this affect the budget? So this is an unbudgeted expense. Therefore, if you have some of the options, or you try to figure out how to pay it currently, and the other option the administration has chosen is to spread this extraordinary cost. It's an extraordinary judgment by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think anyone has seen a $45 million judgment in the county. I can't remember one. But in any event, you spread it out over a number of years, as as mentioned, as has been done in the past, and that's the course of action that would be prudent under these circumstances. So you can spread it out 10 or 15 years and not have that have to be addressed all at one time in a budget.
Now, you used the term unbudgeted amount or account or whatever the term was used. The money was put into a reserve for this purpose. So again, can you explain to us why we would want to borrow the money when money has been sitting in a reserve fund for this very specific purpose?
It's a fair question. I know it's a little bit confusing, but assume that we just pay out of the special account and the money's gone, and we don't do a bond ordinance. You still have to, as an accounting matter, figure out how this fits within the county's financials. So even though the money's been paid out, that's the cash, but it's an unbudgeted expense. And all else being equal, you'd have a $45 million deficit that you'd have to address one way or the other.
Why, if it's in a reserve fund, why is it a deficit if you're spending money out of a fund that was dedicated for that purpose? It's
not a reserve fund. It's a special bank account. It's just cash that is being used to pay the judgment. But like any other expense, the treasurer, when he has an authorization to spend money, he spends money. It's cash, but he needs an authorization. It's in the budget to spend that. Judgments are a little different. We're required by law to pay those. If we have an appropriation, we use the appropriation. If not, the budget office, the controller's office would have to say that's an expense and it has to be met somehow in the budget. It has to be addressed in the budget. Both things have to occur. The cash has to be addressed and the budget has to be addressed.
We have fund balance in the county, correct?
Correct.
So why is it a concern of ours if we have fund balance in the county, apparently including this amount that totals over $200 million, why wouldn't we use cash, which we set aside to pay a judgment, as opposed to then, it's been set aside 18 months ago for this purpose. Why wouldn't we just spend the cash as opposed to borrowing at this time?
We are going to spend the cash, no question about it. The cash will be spent whether it's from the account or from bond proceeds, but you still have an expense, whether we borrow for it or don't borrow for it. There'll be an expense in the budget. If we have borrowing proceeds, you'll meet the expense with borrowing revenues, and it won't be a hit to the budget. If you don't borrow for it, either it would hit fund balance or would have to be addressed otherwise in the budget.
Again, you're saying it's a hit to the budget.
Yes.
We passed the budget for the year 2018 with I guess, a NIFA conformed budget, which has certain expenditures and certain revenues that we're taking in. This $45 million is outside that, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So what is the hit to the 2018 budget that you're describing?
I don't know. It's $45 million. I don't know if it's 2018 or 2017. I think the controller will have to decide that issue, but it's $45 million.
Meaning,
all else being equal.
Meaning in terms of creating a structural deficit issue, is that what you're saying? Because it's not it won't affect whether we spend this or not. It doesn't affect the amount of money that we have in our budget for various purposes, whether it's the police district, police fund, et cetera, et cetera. That money has been budgeted. Whether we spend this money that's sitting there for this purpose or not doesn't change with respect to, on a budgetary basis, what we're doing in 2018.
Like any other unbudgeted expense, say overtime is higher than you thought it was. You'll have to figure out a way to pay for overtime. This is the same thing. You have to figure out a way to pay for this. Term pay, termination pay. If people leave and you've got termination pay and you haven't budgeted for it, you have to figure out a way to pay for it. This is the same thing.
I'm assuming what you're talking about when you're saying unbudgeted amount. You must be talking in some sort of technical terms for the budget. For the layperson,
right. This
money's sitting there. It's outside the budget. So if we spend the money, it doesn't affect our revenues or expenses for 2018. It's sitting there for this purpose. So it is, to our minds, if there's ever anything that's a budgeted amount, it's this judgment. We put cash aside, and it's been sitting there for 18 months waiting for this moment to arrive.
It may be outside the budget now, but it'll be inside the budget as soon as you spend it. And the money has not been set aside on a budgetary basis. The accountants will look at this and say, you've got a $45 million imbalance, and if you borrow for it, you will have met the imbalance. If you don't borrow for it, you'll have to meet it in a different way. The cash is one thing. The budget and the accounting for it is a separate issue.
You know,
I don't know if
we're going in circles. So
Right.
maybe somebody else can improve on what I just did. But Legislator Coppell, why don't you start?
All right, I'll try. So, if we borrow the money now, let's not conflate budget treatment and cash flow, first of all, because you mentioned the cash flow. If you borrow, if you have this $45 million hit and you've got a cash flow issue, you spread it out over a number of years, how would it hit the budget? If you borrow it, or if you just spend it from the reserve fund, it's going to hit the budget in any case, won't it?
Yes.
So if that's the case, then how is borrowing helping the budget? It doesn't, from what you just said. All it does is aid, perhaps, cash flow, and we'll get to that.
You'll have an expense, as you said, hits the budget no matter what.
Right.
If you borrow, you'll have a revenue, loosely defined, to meet it.
But not on a GAAP basis. That's not going to help the budget on a GAAP basis. You'll still have the same deficit either way.
Well, no, not true. It actually will help on a GAAP basis. It won't help under the NIFA test.
It won't help under the NIFA test.
But it will help under GAAP. It will help close the gap.
In other words, what we're doing then is just treating that borrowing as income.
It's an other financing source under GAAP.
So the answer is yes, we're treating it as income.
Well, income's not a term I would use. It's an other financing
Revenue.
source.
You're treating it as revenue.
You're
treating it as GAAP revenue, even though it's borrowed.
It's not GAAP revenue because that's a technical term. It's money that will meet the expense on a budgetary and GAAP basis.
Okay. Now, it'll meet the expense, but on a GAAP basis, you're saying that if we don't borrow it, we've got a GAAP deficit, and if we do borrow it, we won't have a GAAP deficit?
That's correct. Just on this item alone.
I'm sorry?
Just on this alone. I don't want to speak to the entire budget, but on this.
No, I'm only asking about this
Correct.
item.
That's right.
Have you polled the NIFA members on this? Will they allow this
I
borrowing?
haven't.
Obviously not you. I meant you being the administration.
I don't know.
So we're kind of doing this on an academic basis if we do it.
I know NIFA's practice in the past isn't to offer opinions on borrowing unless there's an approval for borrowing. I know that's their general policy.
All right. Yeah, but sometimes they'll do something on an informal basis. They've done that in the past. So the fund balance now, if I understand it correctly, is $205 million. Is that correct?
I think it was the year-end 2016. I don't know of any more recent estimates. On a budgetary basis. On a GAAP basis, the unassigned fund balance is actually about $46 million.
Can you explain that, please?
I'd rather let an accountant do it, but it's under
No,
GAAP.
as far to my knowledge, none of us up here are accountants, so.
Right, but I've been informed by the Comptroller's Office that the unassigned fund balance on a GAAP basis is just over $46 million.
Well, is there someone here who can explain it? You said you'd rather have someone else explain it.
Well, I mean, if you want to ask anything beyond that, but that's what the number is.
And is this money assigned or unassigned? In other words, when you say you've got $46 million balance on a GAAP basis?
Correct.
Including this? Taking this away would do what to that?
It would drop it to approximately $1 million.
So the rest of the money somehow or another is spoken for on a GAAP basis?
According to the Comptroller, yes.
Don't you think that we need to understand this better? I'm not attacking you on this. I mean, before the full legislature votes on this next week.
Oh, that would be helpful, sure.
Well, would you see to it, please?
Sure.
Give me a second, please. So, in other words, you're saying that the fund balance, if we go ahead and just pay this money out, this money has been, you see, here's where, again, where it's breaking down for me a little bit. This money has already been set aside, and it's already unavailable. It's already been assigned to a particular use. then how are you taking it away again from the unassigned balance? Isn't that double counting?
It has not been counted on a GAAP basis yet,
Okay.
because it hasn't been spent yet. There's no expense yet.
I feel like I'm in Wonderland here.
But there's no expense, so it hasn't been included in, in a calculation because it hasn't happened yet.
All right. Yeah, I think I'll yield the floor to whoever else is ready, but I do think that we're all going to need somebody to come up here and explain this, the accounting treatment of all this, GAAP versus stat versus budgetary, in a way that mere lawyers and other professionals can understand. All right, thank you.
Before I pass this along, just in terms of what the effect will be if we release the money that was in the fund for this purpose, what is the negative effect on the county's budget?
Well, it's really, the cash issue is that we'll have $45 million less in cash, so when the Treasurer's Office does its cash forecasting and cash borrowing, they'll have $45 million less, so that's one issue. But the other issue is that the controllers will book this as an expense either in 2017, 2018, depending how it comes out. There'll be a new expense that hasn't been planned for, just again like unbudgeted or unplanned for overtime, that will have to be addressed in the budget, in the results. Are you going to end the year with a deficit because of that? Are you going to do adjustments because of that? Are you going to use fund balance, or are you going to come up with a different solution?
Okay. And tell me, for example, we have allocated funds for example, the youth board, insufficient funds, and we're trying to identify additional funds for the youth board. So whether we release the money that's in this fund for this purpose, for this litigation, or bond it, is it going to have any effect on whether we can identify additional monies for the youth board?
That's not a decision for me, but if you release the money if you use the money from the account, you still have, as I said, the general issue of $45 million additional expense that was not planned for, that will have to be addressed in one way or the other in the budget for 2017 or 2018.
But even if the money stays within the reserve funds, this $45 million that's been set aside, even if that money stays within our reserve funds, it can't be spent for operating expenses, correct?
It's not a reserve fund, it's just a bank account.
All right, we'll call it fund balance. It's within our fund balance. So it's this money that's sitting within our fund balance. We are not permitted to spend fund balance for operating, are we?
No, you can. I mean, fund balance is an accounting concept, but that does happen. Sure, is it you draw down if you have a deficit from one year to the other, it draws down your fund balance.
Right. I understand what you're saying, but will NIFA permit us to, let's say we leave the $45 million in this account that's sitting there in the Treasurer's Office, bonds. Will NIFA allow us then to draw up money from that $45 million to pay for, say, the fire academy, which is underfunded? The answer to that is no.
I'd like to just keep the idea. Go ahead, Bob.
So let's just talk about the cash element. So the cash is set aside in a bank account, and we're referring to it as a fund. It's set aside in a restricted bank account that was set up after we received the judge's order to set this money aside. So it's a restricted account that can only be used for, at this point, the purpose of Restivo. Now, if we have a bond ordinance in place, this cash that's sitting in that account could come back to the county, and it would help us reduce our cash flow borrowing. So that's probably what you're alluding to, but this is not a separate fund where we can then transfer this cash from one fund to another fund to satisfy, let's say, the youth board. Okay. This is just cash sitting in a restricted account that we had to hold back, and it actually reduced our cash until we went out to the market to borrow. We borrowed additional money just so that we can smooth out our cash flow needs over the course of 2017 and into 2018.
Okay. Thank you. That was the point I was getting at. Basically, you couldn't use these monies to pay for current operating expenses or to supplement the current operating expenses within the county budget. But my question is, you talked about cash flow.
Yes.
This money was taken and put into this account so that it couldn't be used for any other purpose for the last 18 months, correct?
The funds were held in this account. We established the account in March of 2017. So the order was served on my office in March of 2017, and at that point we took the funds and we put the funds into a restricted account, which reduced our cash.
Now I'm a little confused because it was July of 2016 in which the county administration came to us and asked us to borrow $45 million, or money would have to be put into an account. So that didn't happen until March of 2017?
So, you're correct. In March, the order we had, the budget office came to me. They told me that there was a need out there for the $45 million. The $45 million was still sitting in our general fund at that point, and it was not until March that I received the actual order that we took the money and we swept it out into a separate account. So,
all right. So that when it was in the general fund, was it assigned to a specific purpose?
At that point, the funds were commingled in the general fund. It was at the point where we received the order from the judge that I had to sign off on an affidavit that I had this money set aside in a separate bank account.
Okay, but the previous administration was understood that this $45 million could not be spent wherever it was sitting because
that is correct. The funds were sitting, but it was commingled, and there was no restriction. I didn't have an affidavit in my hand telling me that I need to set it
because
aside.
the court required that in order as this matter proceeded to appeals.
That is correct.
So for the last 18 months before January 1st, the previous administration was dealing with the issue of budgeting while this $45 million was not available, correct?
Yeah, I'm not, well, as far as the budget goes.
Well, it was, let me be clearer. The previous administration was dealing with the cash flow issues that result from the fact that this $45 million was not available.
It was a cash flow issue at that point.
Right. It's still a cash flow issue.
It's still a cash flow issue.
So
at that point, it was strictly cash flow. It wasn't budgetary.
So when we
now we have it's budgetary and obviously a cash flow issue.
Budgetary, we could go around in circles. I understand. We probably will again, but the concern is because that the cash flow issue is going to somehow affect the county's finances. I mean, that's really the concern that's brought to us by the administration. And the only point I'm making is that concern and the cash flow issues, as a result of this matter, have existed for 18 months because the money had to be set aside for this purpose because we refused to bond 18 months ago.
From last March, it was an issue.
Yeah. All right. Anyone? Sure. We have Legislator Walker, then Legislator Rhodes, and then Legislator Schaefer. And sure, we got you guys.
Just very quick. I don't want to go over everything that has been said, but Mr. Jefferson, as you had stated several times, and it's been stated several times by both of you, that this is something we knew. This is something that we put the money aside for. But Mr. Denyon, you said this is something we didn't plan for. We didn't plan on. So we did plan on it. That's why we had to put the money. We knew we had to pay this money. That's why it was in this separate wherever.
We planned for it on a cash basis, as you said, but on a budget basis, it was not included in the budget for 17 or 18. But, I know it's unusual, but it is really two different things. That the cash still has to be accounted for by the auditors, by the accountants, to figure out how that expense is being recorded in the county's financial statements.
Okay. And who determines whether it's 2017 or 2018 budget?
Comptroller's office and the auditors.
And they don't. And how do they do that?
Under the accounting standards.
Under
the accounting standards, under the GAAP standards.
And they don't have a clue what they are yet?
I don't know if they've made any decisions on that. I don't believe they have.
But if it's under certain standards, don't they have to follow those standards, so they should know?
No, I agree, they will. I just don't know if they've done that yet. They're still closing the books on 2017.
Okay, thank you.
Legislator Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jefferson, the This item came before the legislature in July of 2016, correct?
That's correct.
And when it came before the legislature in July of 2016, it came for the purpose of long-term borrowing to pay the $45 million judgment, correct? Or at least to have the funds available to pay the $45 million judgment, correct?
To have a bond ordinance in place to be able to borrow for the judgment, yes.
Correct. And we could not get the votes to be able to do the long-term borrowing, correct?
That's my understanding.
And the theory behind that was that we did not think it was prudent. We, substantial enough share that we couldn't get the 13 votes, thought that it wasn't prudent to engage in long-term borrowing when we had some cash on hand in the litigation fund and when we had other means to be able to obtain those funds. I don't know if you have personal knowledge of that, but the question that I have is, in between July of 2015, in between July of 2016 and March of 2017, when those funds were finally set aside, can you explain what TAN borrowing is?
Yeah, TAN is a tax anticipation note.
And my understanding of the tax anticipation note is that the county, in order to aid our cash flow, sometimes in order to meet with the knowledge that revenue is coming in, that we'll engage in short-term borrowing to make sure that we have the cash on hand in order to be able to meet our obligations while we're waiting for that money to come in. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is it not the case that the $45 million that was set aside in March of 2017, that the source of that money was additional TAN borrowing that we engaged in the 2016 year?
We did increase our TAN, but it was not. It was the TAN borrowing that we just completed in December of 2017.
Okay. So in other words, the $45 million that now sits in this separate account off of the general fund, understand a layman's knowledge of this.
Restricted account.
Restricted account. Is the result of TAN borrowing?
We looked at our cash flow and we increased our TAN borrowing in the event that we have to pay this out. Regardless of if there's a bond ordinance in place, I would still need I would need the cash in place to get this to make this payment.
But separate and apart from the TAN borrowing that we engage in to meet our cash flow needs, we borrowed an extra $45 million specifically for the purpose of being able to meet this obligation. Is that correct?
We increased our TAN borrowing in anticipation that we may have to pay this out. That is correct.
By $45 million.
But we also have to by $45 million. We also have to understand that that's short-term borrowing. By September of this year of 2018, that will be repaid.
That's fine, but it's $45 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's $45 million that we didn't have, and we wouldn't have had, but for the fact that we borrowed an extra $45 million specifically to pay this judgment.
Not specifically to pay. Right. We borrowed $45 million, looking at our cash flow, intraday balances, and knowing that we possibly had this judgment that may have been, we may have had to pay in 2018. At that point, we didn't know exactly when we would pay it, but I did not want to have a situation where we were short on cash, so we increased our TAN.
Well, Mr. Judge, and I don't mean to play semantics, but however we want to say it was designated, we increased the amount of money that we borrowed because we knew, by $45 million, because we knew that we had this $45 million sort of Damocles hanging over our head.
I think that's fair.
Okay. So the question that I have is, why would we increase the county's long-term debt by $45 million to borrow money to pay $45 million that we've already borrowed in order to pay that judgment? Well, how does that benefit the taxpayers of the county to add to Nassau County's long-term debt to take $45 million that we already have in hand? Why can't we just simply pay it? Aren't we double borrowing money?
We're not double borrowing money. What we're doing, in this case, we're talking about two different issues. When we were informed that there was a judgment pending, we borrowed cash, additional cash, so that we can meet that need. Now we have this bond this bond ordinance in front of you, which has other implications to it, which Colonel Denyon spoke to, whether it's budgetary issues that we'll have and other issues that we will need to discuss further.
I'm just trying to boil this down to its simplest component, and I understand that there may be budgetary issues, that there may be gap issues, that there are separate NIFA gap issues, whatever these issues are. We borrowed $45 million so that we would have the cash on hand in a restricted account to pay this judgment if it came to pass that we lost the appeal.
I just want to be clear. We did not borrow the $45 million. As Wilmot said, what he did was he adjusted his cash flow model, raised it by $45 million because there would be a $45 million cash hit that he needed to account for. That's all short term. It comes due at the end of before the end of the year. What we're doing now in the long-term borrowing is spreading this cost out so it doesn't hit one budget year, whether it's 2017 or 18. You're spreading that cost out over, we hope, 15 years so that there isn't an impact on the county's budget, a drastic impact on the county's budget.
I'm sorry, Mr. Denyon, but what Mr. Jefferson said was the exact opposite of that. What he said was that we increased our TAN borrowing by $45 million.
I'm agreeing with that.
So we had the $45 million that we have on hand, we borrowed, whether it's short-term, long-term, right? We borrowed it.
I know it's a technical point, but when you borrow for particular purposes under law, under state and federal law, you have to say what you're borrowing for. We did not borrow to pay this judgment. We borrowed to borrow for cash flow, because the county's cash flow goes up and down throughout the year.
Fair enough.
I just want to be clear on that point.
We borrowed an additional $45 million.
Cash flow notes.
So that we would have additional cash flow in case we had to.
On a cash basis.
On a cash basis, in case we had to satisfy this judgment.
That's right.
That's correct.
Right? We're solid on that point. So in theory, not in theory, in practice, we have $45 million in a restricted account. That restricted account was established for the purpose of being able to satisfy this judgment. And now the administration is coming to us after the member of that administration, when she was a member of the legislature, voted against the bonding that she's now asking for, asking us to engage in long-term borrowing for $45 million that we actually have on hand to be able to satisfy a judgment that we actually got the extra money through TAN borrowing in order to be able to do that. Why is that in the best interest of Nassau County?
Because you lessen the impact to the budget and everything that comes with that, because you'll either reduce your fund balance or you'll have to do budgetary adjustments of $45 million. You either have a $45 million hit to fund balance or to budgetary adjustments, because all you did on the cash side was borrow short term. It's paid. Now that the accountants will take over and say, now you've got an expense, and that expense has to be accounted for in the financial statements. The cash is not going to be, the cash itself doesn't solve your problem, but it solves your cash problem, but it doesn't solve your budget problem.
Well, Legislator Muscarella actually made an excellent point, which I don't know was on microphone, which NIFA is going to do that anyway, regardless of how we structure this, aren't they?
I mean, they'll certainly weigh in on this, but it's a budget issue. You'll agree. I mean, the NIFA is going to be concerned about the budget issue and certainly want to know how it's going to be addressed.
Well, it's certainly a budgetary issue, but regardless of how that budget issue is rectified, the hard thing that I'm having trouble getting past is the fact that we have $45 million. We have $45 million that we borrowed so that we would have the cash on hand. The judgment's now due. This is $45 million that we've never used. We never relied upon that to operate Nassau County. We never used it for any purpose. We held it to the side specifically so that we would have the cash on hand to be able to pay the judgment. Why would we turn around now and borrow another $45 million to free up $45 million that we have on hand for that in the restricted account for that designated purpose?
I think the answer is, assuming we use the money in the restricted account, you don't borrow. February 7th
but you can't. But correct me if I'm wrong. Right. You can't use the money in the restricted account.
No. I'm saying to pay the plaintiffs.
I'm saying what I'm saying is, if you borrow the $45 million, right? If we engage in long-term borrowing for the $45 million, we float this bond. Right. The $45 million that we have cash on hand, we can't use it for operating expenses. I can't use it to close the gap that NIFA created in youth services. I can't use it to close the gap that NIFA created in terms of funding for training for our volunteer firefighters. I can't use it to pay salaries. I can't use it for any of the operating expenses of Nassau County. So why? When we've been managing for the last 18 months under the prior administration, without this $45 million. Why is paying the $45 million in this restricted account affecting our budget at all?
Because let's say, again, you don't borrow long-term, you just use the money in the account and you write the plaintiffs and the lawyers a check, the $45 million is gone, you're done. When the comptroller goes to close the books for 2017 or 2018, they'll say, I see that you spent that cash, I'm going to look at the cash flow model, I see that it's gone down, that's nice. However, I've got a separate issue now, I'm the comptroller's office. I say to the county, how are you going to, or how did you meet that unanticipated expense, because it's not in the budget. So as an accounting matter, again, this is what I'm trying to stress, as an accounting matter, you have to record that as a $45 million expense, and it's not in the current $3 billion budget. So all else being equal, you'll have a $45 million deficit on your $3 billion budget.
So you want us to...
And if you spread the cost out over 15 years, you won't have any cost in this year because the local finance law allows you to start paying back within 2 years. So you can take this cost, spread it out over years, because it's truly extraordinary. No one has seen this level of one judgment for this much money. I don't think anyone questions that it's an unusually large number. You take it and you spread it out over time. That's what the local finance law allows for.
So am I correct to understand that the reason that the administration wants us to engage in an additional $45 million of long-term borrowing is so that our numbers look better?
Not that they look better. It's that you have a budget that does not have to absorb it all in 1 year. You can spread it out over 15 years. Or maybe 10 or 15, but that's what it is. It's like term pay. When people leave and we borrowed term pay in the past, that's a big number. And so you take that term pay and say, well, look, in January of a year, you don't want to pay all that term pay out in 1 year, so you borrow for term pay, spread the costs over time, and therefore it doesn't impact taxpayers all in 1 year. It's the same idea.
No, I think I understand. I'm not happy with the concept, but I think I understand the concept. But I just want to make sure that if we do not engage in this borrowing, and I know that there are some questions that still have to be answered before this matter moves on, assuming it moves through committee, moves on to the full legislature, that if we do not engage in this borrowing, there is no impact on the cash on hand that we have to be able to operate Nassau County.
There's no negative impact. If you borrow the money, it'll be $45 million better in cash, but it's still a negative impact of $45 million on the budget.
But other than being able to say that we have $205 million in the reserve fund as opposed to $160 million in the reserve fund, it has no practical impact on the operations of Nassau County whatsoever.
I can't address how the administration or NIFA would ask for the gap to be closed. So I can't say that they would allow fund balance to be used. I know that they don't like fund balance to be used. I'm not saying they would or wouldn't do it, but...
No, but the money was put into the fund balance. The money was... I thought the whole discussion that we had with respect to the TAN borrowing...
You've got to think of them as apples and oranges. The cash is gone. As under our scenario, the cash is gone. Now you've got...
No, how's it gone when it's in a restricted account?
No, you pay it. Let's just say you pay it on February 7th. It's gone. The plaintiffs have it. They go away. Right. You still have a $45 million budget deficit, all else being equal. Because you have to record it in the accounting system as an expense, and that hasn't happened yet. And it's not in the budget for this year or last year.
So the concern is that unless we engage in this borrowing, we wind up with a $45 million deficit year-end on the books.
Either 17 or 18, depending on how the controller books it, without any other offsetting actions, correct.
So there's no negative impact to the county other than the fact that we show a $45 million deficit in 17 or 18.
Depends how you want to or are required to close that gap.
Thank you.
Legislator Schaefer.
All right. Hopefully I can remember my question, or that it wasn't answered. How much is in the reserve fund now? Do you have that number for us?
You mean the restricted bank account for the payment of the judgment?
No, the fund balance.
Fund balance. I don't know if Martha's here. I don't know. The year-end 2016, I believe it was the $46 million in unassigned gap, which would be the gap money that could be, drawn down upon on an accounting basis. I think it was about 177 on a budgetary basis, not including the police district. I think I've got that right. At the end of 16, so I can't address that.
16. Okay. So you're saying basically if we take this money out of there, there's only going to be $1 million left?
Well, it's not, I mean, these are accounting concepts. Fund balance is what you have left over between one year to the next. So that's the way it works. You know, if you have a surplus, it adds to fund balance. You have a deficit, it takes away from fund balance. If you have a $45 million deficit, you'll reduce your fund balance by $45 million.
Right.
On both, on a budgetary basis and on a GAAP basis.
And who's, is this the former comptroller's budget that we're dealing with, or are we dealing with?
Well, it's always an administration's and the legislative budget, but the controller is the office responsible for the accounting, and they'll make the accounting decisions, and it gets audited by the outside auditor. So it's the new controller's office. The new controller would be making these decisions.
Okay, because I thought there was a lot more in the fund balance than that. I thought my understanding was about 205
I think
million.
that includes police, if I'm not wrong, police district, which we would not be able to use.
Is everything accounted for that's in that?
Again, that's the end of 2016, but the 2017 number I don't have. I don't know if it's known yet.
Okay. Yeah, so could it be higher, possibly?
I can't speak to it.
Who can speak to that? The comptroller? Someone from his
I don't know
office?
if anyone has, if OMB or controllers has a forecast yet, I don't know.
We're figuring this all out without knowing. I guess that seems a little off to me. But is there a way that we can get an accounting of everything that's going to be?
We'll certainly give you whatever we have as the most recent, yeah.
I mean, I definitely like to see it. I think my caucus would like to see that. If there's money, that's being restricted or it's set aside for other expenses, then we want to know exactly where everything's going.
Right. On a GAAP basis, that's an unassigned concept. That's not already spoken for other purposes. $46 million at the end of 2016.
Okay. Even though all right. I'm not going to repeat the question that's been asked. Okay. That's it for me.
Just a couple more before I turn it over. The actor in the room that's not in the room that factors into this equation is NIFA. My question to you is how is NIFA going to treat borrowing $45 million to pay a judgment when we have money set aside for that purpose?
I don't know how they would treat it, but I do know that they would look at it also as a budgetary matter. As we've been discussing it, is that the $45 million goes out the door as cash. It's unaddressed in the budget, and my guess is they would ask the administration to address it.
So what you're telling us then, in layman's terms, is that with respect to the county government, it is better to borrow than to use cash that you put aside for a purpose. So it is better to borrow for this judgment than it is to use the cash that you set aside for this judgment. Is that what you're telling us?
You need cash in either case, and the administration has decided that it makes sense for this extraordinary judgment to spread the cost of spending that cash over time. And if you borrow, you get $45 million from bondholders, but you don't have to pay back the $45 million for a number of years. Therefore, the impact on taxpayers today is less than it would be as if you said, you spent the cash, now we're going to make you pay for it on a budgetary basis, which, again, would either deplete your fund balance or require budgetary adjustments.
I agree with Legislator Coppell. It's almost as if we're in Wonderland here. I mean, you're talking about the benefits of borrowing to the county taxpayers. This is as if the county taxpayers don't have to pay back what's being borrowed, and they don't have to pay it back with additional money.
I agree. I'm not trying to understate that. I'm just saying that of the two scenarios that a decision is made that $45 million all at once would be not as good as $45 million over time to spread that cost of an extraordinary judgment out.
I'll be honest with you. This did not go the way I thought. I thought the administration was going to be here presenting arguments, strong arguments as to why this would affect our cash flow. But what you have been telling me is budgetarily, this is somehow this scenario in which we borrow to pay a judgment that we have money set aside for is better. I don't know. I don't understand that.
It's a decision whether you want to spread the cost out over time or absorb it all at once.
Rich, can I just say one thing?
And then also the fact that you haven't really explained well, forgive me for saying this, but a statement that you made a couple moments ago was that NIFA is likely to look at this as, regardless of whether we borrow the money, as something that's unaddressed in terms of the gap, not the GAAP, but the GAP in the budget. And if they're going to look at it regardless. It's going to hit the budget regardless. This is not going to help the budget.
Sure it does. So the borrowing proceeds meets that expense. That's how it does help the budget. The borrowing is what solves your budget issue.
And we'll solve the budget, and that's how. And that's assuming that NYFA goes ahead and approves the borrowing.
Certainly subject to NYFA approval.
What's your contingency in the event that NYFA should decline to go along with borrowing?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I'm sorry.
Yes. Let's assume for a moment that NYFA, as has been its practice fairly often in the recent past, declines to approve the borrowing. What's your contingency plan to move ahead with this,
Will
with
be
the budget?
Decision for the administration to address that. I don't have
Isn't
the
that
answer
you?
for that.
No.
I'm not. I don't have an answer for you.
Okay. Okay. So just following up again on something that I had said earlier, not only would we like to have the information for next week, I think that we would like to have the information before next week in writing, perhaps to all the members of this body, so that to give us time sufficient to consider, understand it, and consider it.
I will pass on that request, certainly.
Wait, Legislator Muscarella, and then Legislator, I guess, Division Whitten will go next.
I'll try to be basic and quick on this. What you're telling us now is that it makes sense to spread this expense over a period of time rather than take the cash out. That's correct, right?
No, it's not. Rather than have it be a budget hit all in 1 year. The cash is going to go out no matter what.
Rather than have it be a budget hit in 1 year. Right. And that's a policy decision.
That's correct.
Okay. And without getting political, that policy decision was made a couple of months ago, or 18 months ago, by this body. And that policy decision that was made by virtue of not being able to come up with enough votes to bond it at that time. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, just to be fair for the record, the vote was 11-7, which failed on as a bond ordinance.
It failed as a bond ordinance.
But there was a motion to rehear, and it was tabled.
Okay, it failed.
Well, it was tabled, so it failed. Then it was tabled. It was revoted and tabled.
It failed because the minority didn't put up enough votes for the bonding to be approved. That's fair to say. So that was a decision by this board that the better policy decision would have been to pay it out of cash rather than long-term borrowing.
I don't know if it's fair to characterize it that way because the ordinance was tabled as an item and it lapsed at the end of the session.
Okay, you're playing games. The policy decision by this board was that the prior county executive should deal with it on a cash basis rather than borrowing. And the current county executive was part of this legislature at the time when that vote was made. And so it seems to me that now the county executive's policy decision is that long-term borrowing for her administration is better than the short-term cash position that she voted for the prior administration. I have no further questions.
I'm going to follow up with that, and just to clarify, this is Legislator Curran at that hearing. I just think that this is actually something that the litigation fund is actually for. I know we are asking to use it for this, use it for that, but if this is for litigation purposes, and this is money in that fund, it just seems so logical to use that first. She was arguing to spend the available monies as opposed to borrowing. That's what we're talking about. That's the policy decision that was made 18 months ago.
And I guess if you bring up the litigation fund, we can also find out how much is left in that now. So that would be,
I believe there's $20 million in the litigation fund, so we could look to that as well.
There's 23, which has to pay for all the county's ordinary judgments.
We made those arguments, Mr. Daniels.
No, I agree. I'm just letting you know that there are other judgments that are covered by that.
Thanks. Legislator Division Whitten, she asked first.
I just have one. I think I understand the whole Wonderland just a tiny bit, Rich. The money wasn't set aside. It was borrowed short term. And that money has to be paid back in this November. Is that correct?
The cash flow notes have to be paid back by September.
So this is not money that we got from other lines and put into this account. We borrowed that money that's in that account, the $45 million. Short-term borrowing, but it's due in October. So either we pay the $45 million now, in October, out of cash, or it's spread out with the long-term bonding. So it's not like we had money that we collected. Money was not set aside. Money was borrowed. So now it's just a question if we're going to pay it all back in one lump sum or if we're going to spread it out.
Answer that question. Was money set aside for this $45 million judgment?
Okay. There's cash set aside in a restricted bank account.
Thank you.
But where did that come from? That came from the short-term borrowing or no?
When we did the short-term borrowing, we because we knew we had to set aside this money that was not in the budget, we borrowed additional funds for cash flow purposes.
It was set aside first. The cash was put into a fund in your department, not a fund, but a bank account.
Before we went to the market, we had to set aside these funds. So we put the money into a separate. We took the money out of our general fund and we put it into a separate bank account because we knew our cash flow would be very low, and it was very low throughout the year. When we went to the market in December, we increased our cash flow notes so that we can meet our demands, our cash demands. We weren't looking at budgetary. I'm simply looking at just the cash needs of the county.
And you did the 10 because of those cash flow concerns, because of the fact that that $45 million was set aside in this account. I mean, the decision not to borrow put the $45 million into a separate account, which led to the borrowing.
Yes.
So, I mean, Minority Leader Abrams.
Thank you, President Officer Nicolello. I want to thank Mr. Denyon and Mr. Jefferson for being here. You tried your best to answer the questions as been presented by the majority. Obviously, hearing the questions of the majority, there are many questions that still remain. So, obviously, over the next week, I hope we could try to get some better answers. I do have some preliminary questions that I don't know if was quite explained on the record. The first thing, the controller booking the expense, do we have some idea of whether, Mr. Jefferson, I think you had mentioned it would be 2017 or 2018, but we weren't sure. Has anyone reached out to the controller's office to find out his thoughts on this process and whether or not it will be 2017 or 2018, 2017 or 2018?
That's preliminary. We haven't. I haven't reached out. I'm not sure if the budget office has. If OMB has reached out.
Okay. I think that's a fair question for next week that we should get an answer to find out when exactly, what are their thoughts on when that expense would actually be booked. I guess more of like a municipal finance 101 type of question. It ties to the fact of whether or not why are you two here today, envisioning what would happen in the future if the county basically bonded or the county chose to spend the $45 million that's in this restricted account. Explain to us from a municipal finance standpoint, credit agency standpoint, if the county spent the $45 million out of the restricted account, explain to us what that would have, if any at all, ramifications among the credit agencies, if you can explain it.
I mean, I think it would be, certainly a factor they're already aware of, that these judgments are out there. This is part of our disclosure on bonds, so the agencies are well aware of the potential for the payment. So they will be, they're always concerned about how the county balances its books and how it goes about balancing its books. So whatever decision is made to address the $45 million, if it comes from borrowing, they'll have a view on that, positive or negative, maybe some positive, some negative, and they'll have a view on if we don't use borrowing, maybe positive or negative. But they'll look and see what the solution is to the budgetary impacts, $45 million impact. They'll look to see what's the county's plan to meet that expense.
So in a utopia, the best way to plan for this expense is not the way the previous administration has done in regards to increasing the TAN by $45 million to increase your cash flow. The best way to cover for this expense is by adding to the litigation fund or actually budgeting it in the operating budget of expenses for the county.
Okay, again, two different things. So how you pay for it in cash is one thing, but how you address it in the budget, that's a policy decision.
I'm looking at it from how you address. I'm asking how you address it from the budget.
I can't address that, but it is a policy decision.
But whether it's a policy issue or not, it wasn't addressed in the budget. It's not a seen expense in the budget.
There's, as I think presiding officer said, it's $23 million in the litigation fund. Obviously, that's not enough to pay the regular judgments and this.
Well, let's just talk about that for a second. What are the other judgments that are potentially out there?
The routine trip and falls, breach of contract.
What's the projected estimated total?
I don't know if anyone from Martha's here. I don't know if anyone from budget is here, but I assume that's the projection. Is what's in the budget is the projection. It's kind of early in the year to know what the actuals are projected at, but that was the budgetary projection.
Okay.
I assume so. It's pretty. It's early. It's early.
It's early, but
yeah.
but at the same time, the number could be a little bit less. It could be a little bit more. But the number did not. And this is my greater point, which I talked about a couple questions ago. The number does not take into consideration or into an account the Restivo judgment that was before us today.
I mean, it was if the Supreme Court would have taken the case, it wouldn't necessarily have ended in 2018. I don't know what their schedule would have been, but there was a possibility.
I see.
There was also a possibility for 2017. I mean, it came in 8 days after the end of the year.
Okay. Oh, we could have won. Mr. Jefferson, just a question in regards to this restricted account. Are there other restricted accounts that we should be made aware of?
No, this is the only restricted account that we have set up for judgment.
Okay. One final question. So, in the event the legislature does not proceed with bonding, and you pay the cash, you pay the actual settlement or judgment out of the cash that you've already borrowed via the TAN that took place, which basically forces the county to repay the judgment rather than over 15 years, it would be paid out in September, if I remember that correctly, Mr. Jefferson. October?
No, the short-term borrowing will be paid back by September.
So it would force the county to pay back the expense in 9 months, rather than having what Mr. Denyon said, being paid out over 15 years.
Regardless, we're going to repay the TAN borrowing in September.
But you have no mechanism to replenish the cash flow without the revenue from the bonding.
We would treat it as an advance.
Yeah, we would treat we'll treat the cash as an advance, and we go out to the market yearly, so we would then size the next borrowing accordingly, the next cash flow borrowing.
So the next cash flow borrowing, I'm not trying to understand, the next cash flow borrowing would be adjusted down to reflect not having the $45 million?
No, I guess I just want to make sure that I have the question right. Are you saying if we bonded for it?
No, let me start over. So basically what I'm saying is the TAN that was taken out that addresses cash flow.
Right.
took into consideration the $45 million judgment for the Restivo, but the potential judgment for the Restivo particular case. That being said, that $45 million, that TAN comes due in September of this year to be paid back.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And the preferred, if I'm understanding this correctly from the administration, the preferred route of the process that you would like to see was that obviously that TAN would be repaid because it is required to be repaid in September, but you want to replenish it with the bond proceeds from the $45 million bond that you are asking this legislature to take into consideration.
You want to replenish the cash.
The cash will be replenished if we had the bond ordinance. We would then go, when we go out to market to do a capital borrowing, we would then replenish that.
So I guess the ultimate question would be obviously if the cash is used, because you're going to have to pay that out regardless.
Yes.
The question is, it quickly becomes a cash flow issue to a budgetary issue because you have to take something from your budgetary operating expense, or you talk about budgetary operating revenue. Something has to be used to fill that gap.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I needed to know. Thank you again.
Legislator Birnbaum.
Okay, so following that line, if there is no bonding and the money has to be repaid in September and we have to use the other money to pay the judgment, what is the contingency plan?
Again, that would have to be addressed. I don't have that plan. I don't have that for you today.
Okay, and then next, I think we all need to hear from the comptroller to see how this will affect the 2018 budget.
Or 17, depending on his analysis, yeah.
Yeah, just Legislator McKevitt.
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. As you may have stated beforehand, when the county's been doing its offering statements for its bonds the last couple of years, we've already been including this amount in there. So from the rating agency's perspective, this is no surprise in any regard whether it's to past rating or future rating, should it?
It's not a surprise, but how we're going to address that expense, they'll certainly want to know because that hasn't been determined yet.
And just curious, if we are going to be looking to bond this over, whether it's 10 or 15 years, do we have any estimate as to what the end cost is going to be for the taxpayers for the $45 million? Is it be 46, 48? Can we get any idea what that is in next week?
We could give you a pro forma on that.
I'd like before next week to see that, yes.
I'm going to ask Maurice to come up for a moment because this whole issue of the fund balance is bewildering because some people are saying now that there's $1 million in the fund balance, and the other analysis we've heard, is, including this amount, there's a total of $205 million.
Maurice Chalmers, Office of Legislative Budget Review.
Thank you, Maurice. Again, the issue is, in your analysis, how much is in fund balance for the county?
That number at the end of 2016 was $177.8 million.
All right. And
restricted.
And that includes?
Budgetary, but yes. $177.8 million.
On a budgetary basis, did you say?
Correct.
And did that include, at the end of 16, did that include this $45 million?
No, the 45 is in a separate account. It's in a restricted account.
Okay.
That is totally separate from the $45 million that is in the restricted account.
All right. So in terms of where we are now, do you have, I know it's too soon because the year just ended, but do you have an idea as to where we are as of the end of 2017?
Well, we had projected to use part of the fund balance for the tax certs, which was approximately $36 million that we thought we were going to use, but we are right in the middle of doing the year-end close. That number could deviate, it could change. So we don't have a final number yet.
Okay. And the 178 in fund balance at the end of 16, was that restricted, unrestricted, what?
That is in the undesignated fund balance.
Okay. All right. I'm going to give Legislator Coppell the last word, but on a week from Monday, because we are going to pass this through the committees today, Please don't take all votes to be a sign that we are assenting to this or agreeing to this. We are passing it on to the full legislature. But we want to see the comptroller as well as, the financial people. I mean, Mr. Denyon, Mr. Jefferson have done a terrific job, but we want to see the administration's financial people here.
I think that's fair enough because they will have to make the final decision on what the 2017 numbers are. So I think it's fair enough.
Maurice, just real quick, do you understand Mr. Denyon's point a little earlier of saying that the only amount that is available is $46 million, because that seems to be there seems to be a wide discrepancy with the numbers that you've just quoted to us.
Now, he just told me that was on a GAAP basis, and he got those numbers from the controller's office. We have not seen those numbers. We'd have to go back, take a look at it, and be able to let you know whether we agree with him or not.
So that's what you're we're hoping you will do that, right?
Yes, I will. I will ask that we are copied on any information that they give you.
Because that's obviously very critical.
Absolutely.
And I think I understand the whole problem now. The shoe's on the other foot. That's it. But thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Before I make my comments, Maurice, come back for a second. You had said that the $177 million fund balance at the end of 2016 was undesignated, or you said unrestricted?
I apologize. Undesignated fund balance.
Oh, so we don't know whether or not it's restricted or unrestricted?
That's what we're waiting on the controller to show us the reconciliation from the 177 to the 46 that I'm hearing right now.
Okay, so it's vital we hear from the controller sometime in the next week so that he can give us some specificity on whether or not this money is restricted or unrestricted.
Yeah.
Okay. And the second question, I guess, I had, it'd probably be for more Mr. Denyon, or probably Mr. Denyon. I don't think it's been established on the record on why this is actually before us today. When do we need to make this payment to well, I know that. I know it's February 7th, but I'm established a record from the administration. When do we actually need to make this payment by?
By February 7th, and under the local finance law, if you want a bond for it, you need to pass the bond ordinance before then.
So basically, I'm just making sure as we establish the record, and I'm going to make my comments. If the administration or the county wants the bond for it, they have to bond for it before February 7th?
Just have the bond ordinance approved before February 7th, before the payment. Just the bond, not the actual bonding. As Beaumont said, we would advance. We get the bond ordinance first. We would advance the money, and then we would borrow later and repay ourselves from that advance. Because we wouldn't borrow just for this. We probably, our next capital borrowing, whenever that would be, sometime in the spring, we would then borrow and pay ourselves back under the local finance law.
Gotcha. I just want to concur with the comments that the presiding officer made. Obviously, our side has asked many questions. Some questions have been asked on the floor. Some have been asked internally. And we are looking forward to answers. Obviously, we heard in regards to the controller and some of the OMB questions. Obviously, the $177 million that was booked at the end of the year 2016. So there are many questions that we have. So please do not interpret our vote, even though we will push. We are voting to push this forward. Please do not interpret that to mean that there is solidarity in terms of supporting this particular item. We look forward to hearing some answers to those questions, but at the same time, understanding the restriction that this has to be done or something has to be done, we would not want to stop it in committee without having an opportunity to hear more questions in the full legislature. So we plan to move this forward, but at the same time, there's no indication on how we will vote next Monday. But thank you again, Mr. Denyon and Mr. Jefferson, for being here today.
Okay, so then I'm just going to, what we'll do now is we'll take the vote in the Finance Committee, then we'll adjourn Finance, and Rules will continue. And what the presiding officer and the minority leader said concerning the vote in the Rules Committee goes for Finance as well. We're just going to be moving it forward, and we all look forward to hearing more. That being said, all those in favor of the item on finance, please so indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The item passes. All those, there are no other items before us today, so therefore, motion to adjourn by Mr. McKevitt, second by Legislator Drucker, And all those in favor? Any opposed? We're adjourned. And rules will continue.
So we're going to now vote on the same item in rules, item 13 of 2018. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the item passes unanimously and gets moved to the full legislature. We are going to proceed with the rules calendar for the members of rules who are here. We'll do the contracts first. There's two contracts, and then we'll figure out what of the other items we can consent to do in a block. So I'm going to call item A, contract A5 of 2018. It's a resolution authorizing the director of the Nassau County Office of Purchasing to request oversight of a contract between the County of Nassau, acting on behalf of the County Department of Parks, and Eagle Control Corp. Well, moved by Legislator Coppell, seconded by Legislator Schaefer. The item is before the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. For this item, we're going to have Mr. Ken Arnold from DPW answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Ken Arnold, Public Works. Item A5 is a blanket order with Eagle Controls. They supply labor and parts to fix our county pool systems. We have 6 pools in the county. This contract was originally put out to bid in 2016. We come to you today to extend the purchasing power of the contract to $100,000.
Do we have any questions on this item, on this contract? Hearing none, is there any public comment? I'm sorry. Legislator, next one? Okay, sure. Alrighty. Any public comment on this contract? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, carries unanimously. E1 of 2018 is a resolution authorizing the county executive to execute an amendment to a personal services agreement between the County of Nassau, acting on behalf of the Department of IT and Tyler Technologies. Moved by Legislator Bino, seconded by Legislator DeRiggi-Whitten. The item is before the committee.
So we have Mr. Anthony Paganini from IT, as well as Mr. Stephen Corte from the Assessor's Office. All right, we're calling it audible. It's going to be Nancy Stanton from IT.
Good afternoon. Nancy Stanton, Acting IT Commissioner. We're looking to add $270,000 for services, enhancements, and training to the Tyler Adapt project.
And the Tyler Adapt project
Is used by Assessment, ARC, and the Treasurer's Office.
It's a vital service, correct?
Yes.
Any questions on this item? So, Legislator DeRiggi-Whitten.
Can you elaborate a bit on what the assessment department is going to be using this contract for?
Yes. What this is for, I'm sorry, Stephen Corte, Deputy Assessor. The purpose of our portion of this contract is to update a particular valuation model. All right, there are 3 approaches to value. This is the cost approach. It's one of the 3 major functions that we need to create values. It has not been updated in quite some time. The purpose is to do that, is to bring it up to current market. We've done the rest with the other 2 approaches. We need to finish this. This has to be done outside of the Department of Assessment. So we don't have the expertise in-house to do that.
Are you talking about putting in new values of properties?
No, I'm talking about putting in new cost modules.
Okay.
All right, so when we go to value a property, those cost modules are up to date, up to current speed.
And what would be an example of a cost module?
We use the cost approach typically for special use properties, properties where there's an insufficient amount of income or sales material. All right, so it's kind of a fallback, if you would. Special use properties, say like a self-storage building. All right, even usually most of the time it's you'll find that happening with like churches or ornate properties, high residential properties the same way, where we have to have cost factors included with sales.
All right, so you don't feel that we could do this in-house? You
Oh,
feel
it's
that
not
we-
possible
okay.
in-house.
All right, thank you.
Legislator Bino.
Thank you. Good afternoon. On this contract, were we able to isolate the costs for assessment specifically?
There's a cap of $25,000.
25,000.
That's the cap, yes, for my portion.
Okay, because this contract is increased by 270,000, and so can we speak to why there's other additional costs in this year?
Hi, Anthony Paganini, Nassau County IT. We have a bunch of other enhancements that we need to do, as well as training. We lost a bunch of people to, unfortunately, one passed away, and we also had some people retire that were the experts, so we have training dollars that are added on to that, as well as some other enhancements by other departments that are being used by other departments, as well as IT, assessment, and ARC.
So these other assessments or initiatives and also the training, these costs would then be isolated to this particular year, and so we would only see the increase in this year?
This is one time, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you all. Any public comment? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Sorry, there was one other question. I apologize.
Sure, go ahead.
Is this going to be an assistance with implementing DAF?
Part of this is for DAF, yes.
Okay. How will that manifest? How will they be assisted?
Well, there are.
Beaumont Jefferson, treasurer. There are 4 phases in DAF, and this is to complete the last phase, which is phase 4. So there are different calculations that and models that were put into ADAPT that we have Tyler update in the system to allow us to refund and also do all the calculations. So there are 2 phases that are already in place. There's the third phase will be completed shortly, and then we have phase 4, which is our ability to complete our refund process back to the municipalities and also the property owners.
And so this is going to wrap up in 2018 as well? Phase 4?
Yeah, phase 4 will be done in 2018, has to be, and we'll be able to refund using the ADAPT system.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other questions from the legislators? Any public comment? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Item carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a consent calendar which covers all of the items as well as the item on the addendum. So I'm going to first ask for a motion to suspend the rules. Moved by Legislator Rhodes, seconded by Legislator Schaefer. All in favor of suspending the rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? So with respect to the addendum, there's one item. Well, I don't have the addendum item. I'm going to now call all the items that we have consented to call in block. Items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16, 17, 34, 35, 37, 38, and 40, and the addendum item 41. Can we have a motion to waive the rules, or with the consent of the majority, a minority, can we waive the rules? Waive the reading of all the items. So all those items are before us. Actually, I need a motion, don't I? Need a motion by Legislator DeRiggi Whitten, seconded by our minority leader. These items are before us. All in favor signify by saying aye.
We just want to mention that this consent calendar includes some of the appointments for today.
Yep.
Obviously, we haven't had an opportunity to meet with any of them yet. Some of them we do know from, obviously, their past history with the county. But we look forward to meeting with them before the next full legislative meeting.
And I would also ask that the administration have the appointees present for the next meeting, because there may be questions on the record for some of them.
Yes, absolutely, and we can have them available before the meeting if anyone wants to meet them in person prior.
Good, we appreciate that. All right, the items before the committee, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, carries unanimously. Legislator Coppell makes a motion to adjourn, seconded by Legislator Schaefer. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the Rules Committee is adjourned. Thank you.